Phi Delta Theta. She was a cook there at the college, and then after that doing the rooming house next door here at 205 for about 15 years.
What kind of people would stay?
You know, and that was amazing. Like now it's the bed and breakfast, which is quote unquote pretty close to a rooming house at that time. And then she would have gentlemen just stay with her forever, probably 6, 8, 10 years. They were people that Mr. Garris was a stationary engineer. He was Cuban, and he was a sailor, and he knew boilers. So what better job than work down at the Van Curler Hotel as a stationary engineer? He took care of the boilers. Another Nick Hankel. There were so many people that were just involved with. They worked for Gazette, American Locomotive, General Electric, and they were just men that worked, came home, just needed a place to stay. So, and my grandmother ran a good rooming house, and I think there were nine rooms altogether. Yeah. So.
Did she cook?
No, well, she had her favorites. She would on a Sunday afternoon she'd cook dinner, and Mr. Garris was her favorite, and some of the others had relatives and friends. So, but she always would have Mr. Garris over for dinner because he was kind of by himself, and he occupied the first floor, a room downstairs, and he was a great guy, and but it's just amazing. And then with the economy and things changed a little bit for Grandma in the early 60s, and then she had to give up the rooming house. It was not an active thing. Then she took care of Helen Delancey Watkins, and that's another story in itself. And Helen was the great granddaughter of Joseph C. Yates. So, and she was a sweet lady.
You spent the night there a few times.
I did, yeah. But Helen's mom died, and my grandmother was adopted as a second mother. And not that she stayed nights with Helen, and it was almost like it was a mother and daughter relationship with them. And then Helen lived well into her maybe early 90s, I think, when she died. And then my grandmother said, that was the end of her working career. She was just...
she also worked for a lady over on Washington Avenue at GE President.
She did, yeah, Mrs. Urban. She worked for Mrs. Urban. He was the vice president of General Electric Company. She did the same type of thing. It was more of a companion and more of just being there with her. They became friends.
Was the lifestyle of the Urbans different than today?
They were, yeah. She was quite a lady. I met her as a child, and she was her husband died early. Yeah, in fact, that's when she passed away. She was on her way to golf or something. She was stricken, and she was.
They were the house with the white carpets all the way through.
Yeah.
What number house is that?
I don't remember. No, it's now owned by the Papa family. It's the same house, and it was always a very nice garden area in the back and down to the river and everything. But she was a nice lady, very, very nice.
Entertain much?
Quite a bit, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Did they have maids and things like that? You remember maids in homes?
Well, she had a chauffeur. She had somebody and he was more of somebody that just kind of took care of things. Drove her around and took care of yard work and things. Grandma was kind of like a companion type person, would cook and do little small things.
Didn't several people in the stockade, when you were younger, have chauffeurs or maids? Mrs. Watkins had a chauffeur, and she had housekeeper.
Well, basically
different people had those at that time, didn't they?
Yeah, but they did one and all. It was not really it was more or less like a gentleman that took care of yard work, and that would drive the car. They were essentially.
the neighborhood where the other side of the neighborhood is a big house.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah, yeah, and that was, and in the relationship my grandmother had with Mrs. Watkins was basically just, she kind of adopted my grandmother as a second mother after Helen's mom died. And I can remember she was just a little lady, and she was pretty much bedridden, and but Grandma loved her. I do know that. And then finally, she, when she passed away, that was my grandma was very sad, but she spent probably 6 or 7 years taking care of Helen. So yeah. And that house was incredible because I remember going in there, and of course Sylvia and Bob Bryber lived there now, but it was dark, it was velvet drapes, and it was pretty well preserved. I mean, there were original paintings of Joseph C. Yates. There were furnishings in there. There was a library of books, and mostly all the Watkins family heirlooms were there. Right? And even when Helen died, her dollhouse was given to the Historical Society, which is there today, along with the paintings of the Yates family. And by will, she left those things to the Historical Society.
Another family that contributed a lot was the Fuller family. There's Samuel Fuller, the builder, but his grandson, was the one who invented the pill, and he's also the one who brought photography into the courtroom for medical examinations and forensic science. And he was the one who had the idea of taking pictures in. George Ingersoll brought the water up from down by the pump house, down at North Ferry, up through wooden water troughs up to the courthouse, to the jail. That was the first thing.
Yeah, the first water distribution in Maine, but he was also the first deputy water commissioner, and that was that was a.
And he was friends with Leland Sanford.
Sanford
worked with him.
Well, Sanford built the home up there.
And then George built it, bought it afterwards.
Purchased from Sanford, and Sanford, the farm that was there. Yeah.
And Abby Strong had lived in George Ingersoll's house. George Ingersoll grew up here, and then Abby Strong bought the house. And she was tied in with Sanford also. They were relatives back then. It was like a community of interrelated families.
Yeah.
You mentioned why I was running the water out.
Oh, the water came to this house because it was his father's house. So my father was the sheriff. So some water to the sheriff and some water to the courthouse.
Yeah, I think even the mains that are out here now, the water mains are, of course, they're cast iron, but they're some of the oldest mains in the city, which date 1900, 1920. So it's
This part of the city also got electricity fairly
early. Yeah.
In the 1800s.
That's right. Yeah.
Where other parts of the U.S. maybe had to wait quite a while. Stockade was fairly early. The White House got electricity in 1891, but it wasn't long after that Schenectady also had it.
Yeah.
I know that's a very vague question, an interpretive question, but obviously the Stockade means so much to you. Can you encapsulate that and just talk about, I guess, just kind of bring it all together and say, this is, talk about historic preservation, talk about, why you grew up here, how this is unique and nationwide, this area is unique. Just kind of touch on that.
Sure. Well, I think. I think, with being the first historic district in New York State, formed, I believe, 1962, and it's kind of like if it was, and again with the Historic District Commission and the other governing bodies that we have here within the city, I think that it's the reason it's retained its character is because of that. And it's from the preservation point of view, and again, the houses within the district are are also, of course, on the historic register, each and every one of the buildings. So several people that have done some restorations, investment tax credits with the federal government. They're restoring these buildings, and the tax credit's an incentive. There's several guidelines with National Park Service and SHPO's office that are to be followed, and sometimes that is costly because of the way in which you have to restore the buildings. But several have gone through that.
And there's a balance to be had between restoring and preservation and living. And you can't lose life in the face of preservation. You have to remember that the people here are people, and there is life.
That's right, and we're lucky.
And the old businesses caused life to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to find a balance there and not shut things out just for the sake of what's in your mind of preservation.
Yeah, and we're so lucky. I mean, we have the Dutch architecture of these early buildings, and then we have the Romanesque, we have the Italianate, the French influence, the brownstones. So we have such a variety of buildings and architecture, and it's really great. I believe there's 350 buildings in the district. I'm not sure altogether, historic buildings that are on the register, and
a lot of them have cellars with dirt basements where you can still find relics, like we have found the clay pipes in China and coins and all sorts of things, hardware or whatever, and those can still be found. So it's not like it's a used up area.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Yeah, even our house. I mean, the rear portion of the house was we've documented as older than the 1870 Victorian. It was probably 1750s or a little later, and it was probably a warehouse for the Finn and Ellis, the warehouse for the fur trader that was on site. And of course, and then at the time that it was the main Victorian was built, they probably used that wood frame building for the staging area. So as we restored the house and so on, we found that the brick nogging in the walls, we found a combination of old structural members that had mortise and tendon joints in where it didn't make any sense. So they definitely were reused members, as well as some portion of the house. So that was, we preserved that history.
An interesting thing too is that on this site, some slaves were sold with the fur traders, and then just a few feet behind, years later, was the Underground Railroad, where Richard Brown now lives. So history has a way of correcting things too. Though there was slavery here in Schenectady, and there were slaves sold, and 205 Union Street was full of slaves. Kids who slept on the floor and had to be called. They were called in the middle of the night to come get a glass of water for an adult white person. But then the Underground Railroad processed the black people through to freedom. So within 50 feet.
Oh, yeah.
And so one generation's wrongs can be corrected by the next generation. Mm-hmm. I think that's a neat thing, and that you can find remnants of the history in the dirt. And our children dig in the backyard sometimes, and they found things too that give us clues, like anthracite in the dirt. And the nearest anthracite was either in Vermont or Pennsylvania. Most of it was brought from Pennsylvania. So to heat the homes, these people came all the way from Pennsylvania with their coal. That wasn't locally occurring. There was a small place in Vermont where you could get it. But it's fun to find these additions to history that you don't think about. Maybe they're not that important, but they're fun.
Well, Samuel Fuller, a good example of his art and his construction and his architecture is the McKill Hall, which is the first Presbyterian church right here on that fronts on Union Street, 215 Union Street. And of course, as you go in that hall and see the mahogany, the vaulted ceilings, and the way in which that building was constructed is beautiful. And that was a fine example of some of his architecture here in Stockade that's still here. But he was.
Another interesting thing is teaching children history down there, because you have warfare in a different way too. You have the stockade that ran down Ferry Street, and all the loyalists, or all the Americans inside the stockade. And just outside the stockade where we're sitting now were the British. And so you had British and Americans side by side, the closeness of it, and the George Washington coming to town to get people to fight for the cause. And still you had the British right here. At the same time he came to visit and drum up his troops. You have the history of the Dutch being friends with British, and then the split there, and all those things. And you can teach it right here because it's where you're living, and they can see it, and you can pinpoint places. You can go just half a block down, and that was where they practiced firing their cannons. And then they ran north, and you can teach these things in a way that you just can't get anywhere else. Unless, well, maybe Boston. But
Yes.
I think it's equal to Boston in its history.
I do see groups of people, now going through the stockade and, to take tours and so on, and they seem to be, they're impressed with our little community here,
But
our district.
we need to brush up on our history and do
Right.
better presentation,
They're-
and be
Yeah.
more aware of it and share it a little bit better.
Right, and I
Like Sir William Johnson, the Indian agent, and how he came to town, his part in the town. That was a very major part for America, and I don't think we know that very well. And Guy Johnson coming to town and being so hated and run out. And the effects of Schuyler's son being there. There were a lot of things going on, and we're just not too well versed in that.
Mhm.
It was great to learn about things. I mean, obviously, it's historically all over, be in a neighborhood where it's still, people still live in there and continue.
That's right.
Well, I think it's the way it was because of the cultural and also the closeness to the river. So it became, and not only it became, because of the fur trading and because of the closeness to the river, and then all of a sudden, it started Schenectady being, burnt in, of course, 1690, and then it's now 300th anniversary was just a few years ago of the city. So I think that it's really a community that was I don't know. It just seemed that even from the time of the early 1800s, the canal system here, the Erie Canal, and it's just and the closeness and to the river, it just seemed to just develop as a city and community very early on. So I think that we got
Another
a lot
interesting
of
thing I had
history,
found
a lot
out
of
was
history.
An awful lot of the houses down on Union Street were painted yellow ochre gold color. And they would mix, I found a recipe for the paint, and they would use lime and 25 pounds of sugar and flour. And they'd mix it all up in one color, probably because goldenrod. And they'd use that. But a number of the houses down there were all painted the same color. And color was fashionable. And so you had many, many gold homes. And now the color's been removed, sandblasted off. And we have brick homes. But it was
That's,
highly popular. That was a color of choice for a long period.
The color, the way they did the color like that was it was inconsistent. It was some of the interior color. The color was inconsistent. consistent. It wasn't as consistent as painted now.
Oh, the yellow ochre was mostly on the outside. And
Okay.
if you look closely on the bricks of places, you can see, like on our home, you'll see little indentations where there's still gold hanging onto the brick. And First Presbyterian Church had been painted golden and brown. And it was in the 60s when the color was removed.
Now, was
1960s.
that because of the Water District's
Nope.
recommendation, or just?
It was
No,
just a choice.
just a choice. And
It just happened.
in fact, from looking at the preservation side, I mean, doing sandblasting at that time was somewhat popular. But what it did is, because these were Hudson Valley bricks, when you sandblast, you took the facing of the brick off. So now when you start looking through these buildings, and as Debbie said, you can, in the little, you can still see the little fragments of gold paint. And
So when
that
you
was
see brick,
particularly...
look inside the brick and see
Yeah, that was...
if you can find the color.
Yeah, and we chose trim colors for the house long after I even knew, and I happened to be in the alley one day.
Before you knew.
Yeah, and it was just and I'm looking, and I said, "Wow, look at those little fragments of gold paint in there." So I looked at it, and I said, "It's the exact same color that we chose for the trim," knowing that afterwards, and so we used for some predominant colors for the front of the house, and of course now, looking at the palette of colors that's approved by National Park Service, it's kind of Benjamin Moore, Sherwin-Williams, and then to look at this palette of colors, and they're really vibrant colors. They're such as, and they're reds, they're barn reds, there's some earth colors, some buff colors, and then
Sometimes we think that life was just drab,
no, it's
but it wasn't drab.
No,
It
no,
was
no.
life
They were
was full of, and some people may have
Yep.
chosen tan shirts, and they may have chosen drab colors, but there was a whole other side of it too, the bright, vibrant colors. And,
oh yeah, exactly.
The palette was as wide as the people's
Right,
personalities
and
tastes.
that goes along with the approvals now through the Historic District Commission. That palette of colors, and it's too, that's a good thing, because you don't want somebody coming through. Anybody can paint a house white or trim it out with black, but now when you're picking up some of these other colors, and I think it's important that's followed.
Personalities. So.
Right, same as
Like
it.
down on Front Street where there's a peach house and a turquoise house.
Right.
And
Yeah. Exactly.
as long as it's done tastefully.
Yeah, I think it's a lot to be said for that. Yep. George Weinheimer's house. I mean, he was an artist, and theirs is the turquoise house. It's a more of an English Tudor style with a high gable roof, and I think the color match is nice. But even as a child, I always remember that house being that color. So, and again, as Debbie said, then coupled down is a salmon color. So when you turn the corner at Arthur's and you see them, when you first see them, they kind of...
And yet Arthur's is brick red.
You blink your eye a little bit, but they look nice. They're very, yeah.
You have to, when you preserve, you have to be careful to allow for individual choice.
Right, and I think as time has gone on here, it's just we don't. I guess everybody likes change, and things have changed down here. But I think that in just walking down this corridor of Union from Washington to Erie Boulevard, you just see, not only the churches, but all the facades and everything that have been preserved and restored. It's kind of it's a nice thing. I always like to take a walk in early fall before the leaves come off and just see the tree-lined streets and just take an early morning walk. And it holds its precedence, and it really it has a nice feeling of history. So yeah.
And a lot of education down here too. There's the Union College starting and a female academy. There were schools for children when the rest of the country didn't have schools. It was kind of a beginning place to educate people and take care of them. So it wasn't slow in that area at all.
Mm-hmm.
And the YMCA was started down here. The churches started the YMCA. Yeah, yep. There were St. George's and